on research. And we were particularly interested in asking respondents about their research productivity, how that had been impacted since the outbreak of the pandemic, as well as the implementation of stay-at-home mandates, which also meant the closing of non-essential businesses in many places, which meant a lot of childcare facilities and schools were also closed. We also asked respondents about their service loads and online teaching and how that had changed since the outbreak of the pandemic, since the outbreak of COVID-19. Also changes to any department and university funding for research and travel. We've heard a lot in the news about the sort of dire fiscal straits that many universities are now in. And we also asked about childcare and homeschooling responsibilities, since of course schools and universities were closed or had moved online. The survey was fielded online between May 26 and July 28. We distributed the survey in two main ways. One was through emailing a list of about 600 scholars that were affiliated with the Middle East Studies Association, working in the social sciences and humanities, as well as through social media. So for example, organizations like APSN and Al-Fanar tweeted our survey, as did Marwa and Nermeen through their own personal social networks. In addition to the online survey, we also conducted qualitative interviews with a number of regional and international scholars working in the areas of Middle East and North African research. So we had about 200 plus respondents, again, in the social sciences and humanities. We had respondents from 32 countries, 59% were women.
دولة 69% منهم كانوا مرأة وكان معنا كذلك 70% منهم مناصب ثابتة، مساعد، مشارك أو كامل أو ما يعادله. يعمل أكثر من 80% منهم في جامعات بحثية، إما عامة يعني 56% أو خاصة وهي 25%.
Are political scientists. So one of the main goals of the survey was to look at the impact on productivity, and particularly for research. And perhaps unsurprisingly, we found a big negative impact on research productivity. 67% overall in our survey reported a decreased number of hours devoted to research. And this was particularly acute for those with small children, those under the age of 18, as they now had to take on more childcare and homeschooling responsibilities than before March 2020. 60% also reported that their non-research and their service workload increased. And this, we found, was especially pronounced for female faculty, both those with and without children. Another 70% noted that the number of hours that they devoted to teaching had increased since their universities had moved online. So they were spending more hours on teaching than they had previously. As MENA scholars ourselves, we were also interested in the impact on research in the MENA, which is something we also explored in our survey. In our survey, about 50% of the respondents reported working in or on the MENA. Scholars conducting MENA research, as we know, face many challenges to conducting fieldwork, even prior to the pandemic, but the difficulties have been compounded in recent years because of the surge of wars and conflicts. And one of sort of the first things that stood out to us was as a likely impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and the inability to conduct fieldwork in person and to travel for research was the inability of scholars to now spend countless hours in the field building networks of trust, which is so essential for ensuring the safety and privacy of research subjects, as well as the ethical implementation of research design. In terms of the findings from the survey, from this figure, we can see that about over 90% of those working on the MENA had to postpone travel for research, and many have noted, and especially since we've sort of gone through the summer and now are well into the fall, it is unclear when many will be able to restart or resume these in-person and in the field data collection efforts. 54% of those that work on the MENA postponed applying for funding or funding for research that requires travel, and only about 31% of MENA scholars were able to actually conduct the work they needed to do remotely or online during the height of the pandemic this past summer. While the pandemic disrupted in the field data collection and research plans for this summer and fall, there have been a few positive impacts, in the sense that about 30% of our respondents from the MENA reported starting new COVID-19 related research projects, and 46% reported starting new research projects, whether not related to COVID-19. So in that sense, potentially researchers are getting creative about how they will modify their research agendas moving forward. And we'll probably see more. This has presented some opportunities to explore new research ideas, like how the pandemic has played out in the MENA region, regime responses, amongst other developments that we've seen over the summer and are seeing now in the fall. Of course, we expect long-term effects, especially for a field that relies so much on in-person and in the field data collection efforts. Field work is important to many MENA scholars' research agendas, and it is, again, unclear when this will be able to be resumed. Because of this postponement of travel and field work, many scholars that work on the MENA believe there will be an increased reliance on remote access and online data techniques moving forward. So about 88% of respondents reported this. And many, 76%, expect that there'll be fewer publications that rely on this, on these important firsthand materials and primary source materials moving forward. There is also some concern about funding, especially funding for non-COVID related studies. Of course, there has been a increase in funding for COVID related projects, both especially for health impacts on health in urban and other areas, but it's unclear whether this what will happen to funding for non-COVID related research moving forward. And also, some of our respondents pointed out that this effect, especially on funding, is particularly acute for scholars in the region, who even before the pandemic were already facing sort of insufficient and inadequate funds for research and travel at universities in the MENA. So we're going to wrap up here and turn it back to David for questions from the audience, as well as from David himself. We had a few open-ended questions on the survey, and we received a lot of thoughtful and insightful responses to these questions, and so we've included a small sample on the slide, which you can access either on the Google Drive or through the chat, and you can, we'll leave these up, but you can download the PowerPoint and look for yourself. So we'll end it there and pass it back to David.
Okay.